Hi, my name is Monique and I'm an interpreter with the Friends of Gatineau Park, which is a nonprofit organization that organizes educational activities in Gatineau Park throughout the year to help people to appreciate the rich cultural and natural heritage of Gatineau Park. I'm delighted to be with you here today to take you on a virtual tour of the Lauriault Trail, which is one of the most beautiful trails in Gatineau Park. It's a wonderful place, especially in the spring, when all sorts of spring flowers are coming up. And that's what we're going to be looking at today as we go around the trail. We'll be discussing some of these wonderful flowers as well as the biodiversity, rich biodiversity, and some of the folks that called this place home over the years. We're now on the Lauriault Trail, which was named after the Lauriault family, a pioneer family that came to the area in 1836. The Lauriault Trail runs along the Eardley Escarpment, which is about 50 kilometers long and 300 meters above the valley floor. It was created when a large landmass dropped along a series of fault lines. And so this creates a different a special microclimate. The escarpment is south-facing, so it gets a lot of sunlight, and this creates really ideal conditions for a lot of rare plant species, including the spring ephemerals, spring wildflowers that we're going to be looking at, introducing you to today. Right now, if you look around, you'll see that we're in a maple forest. And maple forests are a wonderful environment for wildflowers because the leaves are not yet out on the trees this early in the spring. There's lots of sunlight, and also after the snow has melted and the spring rains come, there's a lot of moisture in the soil for the wildflowers to grow in. And the soil is also rich in nutrients because there's lots of decomposing leaves left from the last fall. So all of these characteristics make for ideal growing for the spring flowers. The wildflowers are very fragile and they have a lot of work to do in a very short period of time. And so one way that we can help to protect these beautiful spring flowers is by staying on the trails, staying on the marked paths, and by not picking them. It takes a long time for many of these flowers to have their first blossom. It can take years, actually, sometimes up to 10 years. And so we just want to ensure that as many people as possible can enjoy these flowers each year. So thank you for staying on the trails and not picking the flowers. Just take pictures. The spring wildflowers come in a lot of different shapes and sizes. And right here I want to show you, we've got a great diversity in this really small patch right here. You might miss these if you don't look very carefully. They're called the spring beauties, called the Carolina beauties. They're a delicate white flower with little pinkish purple stripes in them. And that's a characteristic that really aids in guiding the pollinators to the center. So it's very strategic of them to have that appearance. Another interesting thing about these beautiful flowers is that when they are ready to release their seeds, even though they're only about 5 centimeters tall, they can project their seeds about 60 centimeters. So that's pretty amazing for a little plant. Also in this patch here, we've got some white trillium, not open yet, but we'll see more of them later on the trail. The yellow flower in the background is a little trout lily. There's also a red trillium in the background there. And further back, we've got some wild leek. So just to give you an idea of the rich diversity that there is here in the Lauriault Trail. Here we have a lovely example of the trout lilies. There's a little group of them here in a cluster. The trout lily you can recognize by their leaves. If you notice, they're speckled, sort of grayish brown and green, much like the skin of a trout, hence their name. The trout lily, as many of these wildflowers, have a very short window of time, as I mentioned earlier, to go through their life cycles. So they have to very quickly produce their leaves, their stems, their flower, etc. And in the trout lilies, it takes 10 years to get to the point of flowering. So initially they have a small leaf, and every year that leaf gets a little bit bigger, and eventually they will have 2 leaves, which is what they need before they can have a flower. And so it's really important to take good care and stay on the paths and not pick them, as tempting as it might be. They are lovely, but they'll be there for everyone to enjoy if we just leave them. And they're located very close to the pathways, so you don't need to go far. And if you do see something that looks interesting off trail, bring your binoculars along with you, or use your zoom lens on your camera to enjoy them and see them closer up. Have you ever noticed this little flower here? It looks like purple broccoli, but it's actually the beginning stages of a flower plant called early meadow rue. So it starts out like this. The leaves are very tightly wound together in there, and then it starts opening up. And then you see here the leaves, what they look like once they've come out of the bunched stage. And then the interesting thing about this flower is that plant is that there is a male plant and a female. So the flowers look different on the male and the female, and they have to be pollinated. And they can also flower multiple times in the summer. Here we have noble liverleaf, also known as hepatica by many people. These are one of the first spring flowers to come out once the snow has melted. They're very interesting because they have kind of like a hairy stem and underleaf, and these are actually formed during the fall and help them to stay warm through the winter. They can come in white, pink, different shades of pink and light purple, even blue. They're absolutely gorgeous. Yeah, so as I was mentioning, the stalks are hairy, and also the buds have a hairy covering on them that help protect them in the winter, because the buds are actually formed in the fall. So are the new leaves, but when the plant comes up, the stem and flower come first, and then after it loses its petals, then what remains is the beginning of the new leaves. And the leaves have it's called liver leaf because of the shape of the leaves, and it was used by indigenous peoples and others in the past because it was believed that it could help to treat problems with the liver. Did you know that we have ginger, wild ginger, here in Canada? Wild ginger is interesting because it has a rhizome, which is like a stem, a horizontal stem that normally grows underground, and the flower, the ginger root flower, and the leaves come right out of it. They're not usually exposed like this. They're usually covered in leaves, and the flower is difficult to see because of that, and it's also because it's very low to the ground. And you might wonder why is the flower so low to the ground? Flowers are usually up high on stems, but this is low to the ground because it's pollinated by a beetle, and so the beetle has to be able to crawl inside of it. So wild ginger, while it doesn't taste exactly like the normal root ginger that you might be familiar with, it was used by settlers and as a substitute spice for them. And it also had medicinal purposes. It was used to help indigestion and coughing, curing coughs. Here we have a plant called the blue cohosh, and it's got a waxy kind of leaf and stem. It starts out as a purplish browny color, and then within a week or so it turns more green like this. It has a purpley brown colored flower here, lovely little flower, which will eventually turn into a purple berry or a blueberry, and it's not edible. It's actually quite toxic, and indigenous people, it causes cramping, so indigenous people actually used it to induce labor. This is a really fun little plant. It's called Dutchman's breeches, for kind of obvious reasons here. They have these long lobes here, and it kind of looks like a clothesline with the pants hanging out to dry. And the nectar that they have is actually deep inside of these lobes, and so the bees are one of the few, and some butterflies, who can actually have a long enough proboscis to get inside and get the nectar to pollinate them. They have a close cousin called squirrel corn, which also is on a stem like that, but the shape of the lobes is a bit different. It's more heart-shaped, and it doesn't have the little yellow waistband of the breeches here. It has more of a pinkish, I'm not sure what to call it, pink at the bottom. So yeah, they're very interesting. The Dutchman's breeches are one of the earliest spring flowers, and they very quickly actually lose their leaves after they've stored the nutrients in their bulb, and then they store that energy over the winter until next year. Here behind me we have a patch of wild leek, also called wild garlic. It's a protected species in Quebec. It tastes like garlic, and it was over harvested, and so in 1995 it became illegal to harvest and sell wild leek. It is one of the first greeneries to appear after the snow melts in the springtime, and it plays an important role in the ecosystem because its leaves absorb. They're often found actually on slopes, sort of from the bottom of a hill going halfway up, and sometimes in sort of flat floodplain areas as well. And they absorb a lot of the rainwater, and the minerals and nutrients from that are absorbed into their leaves, and they drop their leaves about 15 days after they reach maturity. And so then all those nutrients from the decomposed leaves goes into the soil, and that helps other flowers and plants to grow further along in the season. And one fun fact to note is that their flower comes out in July. So even though the leaves appear in April and then disappear, the flowers don't appear until July. Here we have a red trillium. The National Capital Region is home to different species of trilliums. There's the white, the large white leaf, and the red that we have here, and there's also one called the painted trillium, which is white with a pink stripes in the center. The interesting thing about the red trillium is that it actually has a bad odor, but an odor that actually smells like rotting flesh, which doesn't sound very appealing to us, but for the carrion flies that pollinate it, it's actually very attractive. So it's a very effective means of making sure that it's pollinated and can continue on. The trillium has 3 petals and 3 leaves here, and then it has the 3, they're called staples, which are these 3 which also look like leaves. So the trillium, that's why it's called trillium. It had a lot of different medicinal uses, both for native peoples and early herbalists. It could be used to treat anything from acne to nosebleeds to difficulty in childbirth, hemorrhaging, all sorts of things. So it's a beautiful plant and has many purposes. And it's, as I mentioned, pollinated by flies. Many of you are probably familiar with the white trillium. Like the red trillium, it has 3 leaves, 3 petals, and 3 stipules. It's also the emblem of the province of Ontario, and it's a vulnerable species here in Quebec. It's a very slow-growing flower. It can take anywhere from 10 to 17 years to flower. And it only remains in flower for approximately 8 days before withering and turning pink. It's pollinated by honeybees, bumblebees, and wasps. And it's really interesting the way their seeds are looked after. Their seeds are actually carried away by ants because the seeds have a substance attached to them which is very rich in fats and proteins, which attracts the ants. And so they take this substance is called elliosome. And so the ants take the seed and the elliosome back to their nest, and there they eat the elliosome, and then they discard the seed, but it's in their nest, and so it's buried underground. It's in a safe spot, in a place that's rich in nutrients, and it's taken it away from the mother plant, so there's no competition. Other ways that their seeds are transported is through the deer, because deer actually like to graze on trilliums. They eat the taller ones, and then they will carry them, eat them, and they'll be excreted, and so they may be taken as much as a kilometer away from the original mother plant. So it's a really good system. Here we have a bloodroot flower. Does it surprise you that a flower with the name bloodroot is white? Well, the reason that it's called bloodroot is because it produces a red sap in its roots. And this sap was used by indigenous people to make face paint, for rituals and for battle. It was also used as a dye for baskets and clothing and wool by both indigenous people and settlers. So it's a very versatile plant. Another interesting thing about it is that the stem and the leaf are separate. They're on 2 separate stalks. And it only blossoms, it only opens when the sun comes out. And it just stays open for a few hours a day. And then as you see, the leaf just kind of wraps around it, almost like a cape. So it's a really lovely flower. It also is a species at risk. So it's important just to enjoy it by taking a photo or just admiring it. Its beautiful white petals and yellow center. So we're now at the Lauriault lookoff, looking over the beautiful Ottawa Valley. We're about halfway around the Lauriault Trail, but we've finished the section where the greatest variety of wildflowers are. We've been fortunate to enjoy and learn about many different types thanks to the wonderful microclimate that exists here on the escarpment, and this wonderful time of the year where the trees aren't covered in leaves and blocking the sunlight for the wildflowers. So I hope you'll come and enjoy this beautiful trail and the flowers, the spring wildflowers, with your family. Take lots of pictures and leave only footprints on the trails. On your way back to your car at the Mackenzie King Estate, you might want to stop here at the Mulvihill Lake picnic area and viewing platform to enjoy some of the wildlife that the park has to offer. You can find painted turtles, snapping turtles, sometimes beaver, different ducks, bullfrogs and lots of tadpoles, as well as some plant life like water lilies and irises. So it's a great place to have a snack or lunch after you've enjoyed the wildflowers that we saw earlier. And it's a place to come. I encourage you to come as often as you can. The flowers are changing all the time, and so you can see new things every time you come. I hope that you've enjoyed this virtual tour of the wildflowers along the Lauriault Trail. It's been my pleasure to be your guide. Thank you for joining us.